The LongBio Report 2025 has been produced by Healthspan Capital. Now, the fund's mission is to invest in early-stage longevity biotech, or LongBio, and regenerative medicine startups to extend healthy human lifespan. Now, the company's investment portfolio is a roster of many of the exciting early-stage companies in the longevity field, many of which we report about ourselves. And the report is a result of the firm's deep knowledge of the space. And I'm joined today by one of the fund's GPs and an author of the report, Sebastian Brunemeier. Sebastian, how are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, great. Well, looking forward to receiving the report in its entirety. So obviously embedded in there is lots of great information. So what are you seeing as the trends that are emerging and the breakthroughs that you're seeing in longevity biotech in the report?
Sure. So over the last 20 years or so, the field of basic geroscience, researchers in the longevity field, the biology of aging, have managed to extend mouse lifespan up to about 30% therapeutically and about 50% genetically through dozens of different types of interventions that can be combined for synergy eventually. So we saw that there was this huge opportunity on the science side that is still to this day, despite a lot of the excitement around the longevity theme, not really being translated as quickly as we would hope into the clinic and into new medicines. So there's this gap. And when we see that kind of gap, this mispricing in the market, that's an opportunity as investors. Almost like being early to Bitcoin or early to investing in internet companies or something like this, you can achieve incredible returns if you're early to this sort of global trend. And so we see that unfolding right now in the LongBio field. So new drugs that slow the aging process, we think are much more likely to work in the clinic. So one of the problems with traditional pharma today is we rely heavily on these contrived animal models of disease like Alzheimer's mice or tumor xenografts that are not recapitulating the human condition, the human disease. And one of our advisors and friend, Jack Scannell, coined the term E-rooms law to describe how there's a exponentially decreasing R&D efficiency for pharma,
Absolutely.
oral R&D in pharma. So This is a problem. It doesn't make sense. How do we square the circle? It's getting cheaper and cheaper to get the inputs, like the omics inputs, and collect data for drug discovery. And yet the industry is getting worse and worse. At least big pharma is getting worse and worse in terms of R&D efficiency per dollar. They're getting new drugs approved. And the drugs that are approved are incremental. They're often Me Too drugs. They're not new mechanism of action. And they don't meaningfully extend lifespan. So we kind of see these market disruptions, these mispricings or these issues as an investment opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, you guys have demonstrated that with your dollars. Now, where do you see the longevity biotech sector evolving now over these next 5 years? Lots of things happening in the space with AI, and we're seeing lots of big capital coming in. What are you seeing in the next 5 years?
Sure. So, about a dozen years when I got in the field, it was fringe. It was not cool. In fact, there were academics that had to kind of hide that they were working on longevity because it was perceived as unfashionable. That's completely changed in the last decade, which is positive, but still the amount of capital that you would expect to come into this field hasn't really come in yet. So we keep track of the amount of capital coming in. And on average, it's only a couple $100 million a year. There are a couple outliers like Calico, which has raised over $3 billion out of Google, and Altos Labs, it's also raised over $3 billion with prominent investors. But on balance, the field isn't getting nearly as much capital as you'd expect. I mean, for example, the biotech venture field in the United States is between 10 and 20 billion a year. So, we're just getting a small fraction of that. We're also just getting a small fraction of the total NIH budget in terms of geroscience research. So there's a lot of interest. Whenever I speak to somebody, at a cocktail party or something, they'll say, "Oh, you're in longevity. That's such a hot field right now. Everyone loves longevity." And I think oftentimes they're speaking about the diet and lifestyle aspect. So, the Brian Johnson type regimens, which are great. Like, I'm a huge fan of, trying to optimize your health. But what I have come to I've concluded that, we probably only get 10% lifespan extension, even with the perfect diet and lifestyle. We do every ascetic, yoga and caloric restriction or whatever you want. In the animals, when we do really hardcore diet and lifestyle interventions, we max out at, say, 20% lifespan extension at most. So what I think will happen over the coming years is people will say, okay, I've dialed in my diet and lifestyle pretty reasonably, but this isn't really going to move the needle in the end. Let's go to the next stage, which is therapeutics. So particularly gene and cell therapy. We believe that gene and cell therapy are the future of medicine. Small molecules, we had a good run for the last century plus, but they're inherently limited. And so we're going to move into an era of rewriting the code of life with gene therapy and, growing organs ex vivo, delivering stem cells, and really profound benefit through cell therapies as well, as we've already seen some of this in the oncology field, for example.
Yeah,
so
and I had a chance to look at the preview of the report, Sebastian, and obviously, you mentioned gene and cell therapies, but I mean, what are the other technologies, perhaps not at that high level, but other technologies that you're seeing coming through that are starting to really help address some of these age-related diseases?
Sure. So there's a lot of hype around AI, especially these days, although the DeepSeek revelation from China might have sort of deflated the bubble a little bit. We haven't really seen that much that is groundbreaking or going to solve the main problem of drug discovery via AI yet. So the main problem of drug discovery I already alluded to, and Jack Scannell has written at length about this, as have others. The problem is drugs that seem to work in the mice or other animal models do not work in the clinic. So there's low concordance, there's low predictive validity between the animal models and the human disease. We have not come across any AI company that has a plausible solution or answer to that. AI companies are generally focused earlier stage or later stage in like patient recruitment for clinical trials. But it's more focused on generating new chemical matter or target identification or this kind of thing, which is helpful, but it's not the bottleneck. In any manufacturing process, there's one rate limiting step, or in chemical synthesis, it's a rate limiting step. That's the bottleneck. And the bottleneck for drug discovery is animal models of disease are not realistic. So in the LongBio field, we actually have a partial solution to this problem, which is instead of testing drugs in like a Alzheimer's model or something contrived, we test drugs in normally aging wild type animals. So yeast, worms, flies, fish, mice. If you have a drug that extends lifespan and health span and robustness across species that are many millions of years evolutionarily distant, that's a lot more likely to work in humans too. So take rapamycin as an example. Rapamycin extends lifespan in pretty much every model that you test it in, and it also works in many different animal models of disease. So we like to triangulate between a lot of different animal models of disease in addition to wild type aging. And we think that robustness of data package will increase the clinical trial success rate. I mean, even if it increases only by 10% or something, that is worth billions to the industry. So once the world realizes this, that we're basically navigating, the stormy waters of drug discovery more efficiently by targeting aging itself, there will be hopefully a deluge of capital coming in.
And of course, there are a couple of companies in the report. You talk about Shift Bioscience. Now, they're obviously using, just winding back to AI, they're using AI to really support identifying transcription factors in combinations of cell rejuvenation, which is very interesting technique. And of course, you've got ImmuneAge, right? So they're doing high throughput screening. So do you feel that these companies that are obviously innovating at a cellular level, but also looking at different ways of proving their model, they're part of the formula for these new companies?
Yeah, so AI is definitely part of the formula, machine learning, AI. It's a useful tool, absolutely. And we expect it's going to get better over the next 10 years or so. But again, it doesn't solve the core bottleneck. So, we can have all of the early stage drug discovery, drug screening, phenotypic drug discovery, target ID dialed in, right? And that's very helpful, but there will still be that fundamental blocker of animal models of disease. So we like to invest in companies that are applying the latest and greatest across technologies, whatever the technology may be. But a lot of people talk about AGI or talk about AI like this deus ex machina. It's going to solve all our problems. Like Peter Thiel talked about this indeterminate optimism, right? In this quadrant talk, he talked about indeterminate optimism, like sort of the Ray Kurzweil view that, okay, we don't need to do anything. We can just sit back and wait for the singularity. And Thiel basically says, no, that's not true. It's all about individual human agency, and you have to actually dive in and into get in the arena, basically.
Yeah.
So that's how we see it. We like AI, but yeah, we haven't seen many huge breakthroughs in the drug discovery side. And by the way, people have been, Bruce Booth at Atlas Venture writes about this, and various others, that people have been talking about AI and computational biology in drug discovery for 20, 30 years. And, it's incremental. It hasn't been a major breakthrough yet.
So let's talk about some of those breakthroughs. I mean, obviously, a lot of these companies in the report are targeting, disease. They're very disease focused before they broaden out into other indications, which of course is the classic model, right? Do you see any companies that are just kind of going all out and saying we're going straight to longevity and trying to bypass some of those other indication focused companies?
Yeah, that's interesting. We haven't come across companies with that strategy. We have come across some clinical trials like the TAME study. This is kind of not well appreciated. A lot of people in the field or new to the field will say, okay, well, you can never have longevity on the label of the drug. It can never be prescribed for longevity because those trials take too long and FDA would never clear it. That's incorrect. FDA has cleared a clinical trial design, thanks to Nir Barzilai and colleagues, which is the primary endpoint is latency from first to second morbidity. So when you get sick with one thing, you're likely to get sick with another thing because the organ systems are connected and aging is an exponential function. So that's actually been cleared as a clinical trial design. What would be on the label remains to be seen, but that's not a huge burden. The problem is running a clinical trial of that length and with that many patients is expensive. So in the near term, if you just get approval for one indication, whether it's age-related or not, generally that's enough to recoup the investment for the investors, and then you can label expand from there. So a common strategy is you go for a rare disease, relatively low-hanging fruit, easy trials to run, and then you expand the label later. But we also like companies that don't have that risk of getting distracted. So like it's possible that a company might get approval for one niche indication, one rare disease, and then they just kind of focus on that and they don't expand the label. In fact, with some of our portfolio companies through Healthspan and Apollo and Cambrian, we've asked that they commit to making sure to expand the label. And if they get acquired, that has to be one of the deal terms that the pharma is going to run these studies in expanded label on more common conditions like sarcopenia or arthritis or cardiovascular disease or some major age-related indication.
Yeah, that's interesting because, of course, we don't want any of those to be sort of Rembrandts in the attic that never come down again, right?
Yeah,
So let's talk a little bit about the investment landscape. Obviously, there's a lot of work going on now with DAOs, crypto, and so on. Some very interesting things happening in the space. Where are the gaps, do you feel, Sebastian, with what you're seeing out there? You guys get in early, right? So do you see that there's a sort of valley of death on the funding side of things still in the space?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the last 3 years have been the worst bear market in biotech history. Biotech's a relatively new field, maybe 40 years old. And so this has been the worst downturn. There seems to be light at the end of the tunnel with political changes, interest rates, supposedly coming down. There seems to be a bit more capital coming in. But yeah, it's been tough. But on a secular basis, we do not see a world in which people become less interested in longevity. And governments become less interested because there's this global demographic aging crisis, the silver tsunami. Governments don't have any credible plan to deal with it. And we think the best way to intervene in this global population aging crisis, this unfundable Ponzi scheme, pyramid scheme dynamic of the pension funds and et cetera, and Medicare, would be to slow aging itself. In the United States, healthcare is like 20% of GDP. And if we could just be healthier, there would be significant dividends paid. So trends that we see in the funding landscape seems to be getting a bit better. But yeah, I mean, there are only really between 50 and 100 biotech venture funds globally that control 90% of the capital, and between 10 and 20 pharmas of note that control most of that development capital. And then the NIH controls probably 80% or 90% of all of the basic research funding in the space. So the trouble with that is if they all have a consensus that, okay, we're not investing right now, we're risk off, the capital completely dries up. The other challenge with that is dogma. It's groupthink. So kind of like I mentioned, the amyloid hypothesis of Alzheimer's being this false paradigm, this false dogma, that can happen a lot when it's, the scientific capital is concentrated in few hands. So that's why we like to see more funds getting launched. And there is a bit of a democratization of venture to some extent too, which we're bullish on.
Yeah, great. And of course, that's probably why you put the report together, right? So you've got the LongBio report 2025. What are the most interesting things you found out of that? What surprised you when you put the research together?
Sure. So in this report, led by our colleague Alex Chernev, venture fellow at Healthspan Capital, we surveyed the field. My colleague Nathan Cheng, he has LongevityList.com, keeps tabs on all of the longevity and longevity adjacent companies, clinical trials, funding events, job postings, etc. And so from that, we kind of boiled it down to around the top 50 LongBio companies that we really wanted to highlight, that we believe have very compelling science, teams, and overall strategies. And so there are a lot of companies, over 150 companies that are sort of longevity adjacent, pseudo longevity. We tried to boil it down to the ones that we think are true blue LongBio companies that have drugs or mechanisms that are likely to meaningfully extend human lifespan. So we, for every company, we have about 2 pages summarizing information about the team, the science, their commercialization strategy. For many of these companies, we reached out to them to get a little more information than what's available publicly. And we think this is going to be very helpful just so other investors or founders know that there's a distinct field of LongBio emerging, kind of like there was this distinct field of synthetic biology, engineering life to make things. And then that became an investable theme, and VCs, had a partner who specialized in synbio, synthetic biology. That's what we're trying to do with this term LongBio, is to kind of, instantiate or concretize it as this distinct field that investors need to have a thesis on, founders know that they can go into that field, et cetera.
Great. And let's talk about people coming into that theme. So Sebastian, you've been in this field for a while now. A lot of people, as you say, picking up interest in the theme now. If you were to give them one bit of advice getting into the longevity biotech space, what would you give them?
As investors, or as founders, or as scientists, or all
let's start with founders and scientists.
Sure. Well, we firmly believe that LongBio is the future of medicine. It is the apotheosis of medicine. It is the holy grail. For thousands of years, humans have quested after extended healthy lifespan. And it's always been sort of a pipe dream. It's been fantastical. But now we can do it in animals pretty reliably, extend healthy lifespan, and even to some extent turn back the clock a little bit. So, most diseases are driven by aging. And we believe that eventually the field is all going to have to converge like a black hole, being sucked into the event horizon of longevity and slowing the aging process. Because we believe the most effective medicines are treating the root cause of disease. And there's nothing more at the root than aging for most disease. So we think it's wise. We think it's a good long-term career strategy, and going to make the biggest impact in medicine for founders and investors. For founders and scientists. For investors, same argument, but basically I want to underscore that we think the clinical trial success rates are going to be higher. And that's the number one value accretive factor, is your clinical trial success rate. So yeah, it's going to take probably a little longer than people expect, but it's not this, inevitable, process of history that's immutable. It all depends on what we do today, whether we can bring capital, talent into the field, and more capital for the basic research too. So that's what I and my partners at Healthspan Capital, we've dedicated ourselves to. We're not really in this for the money. We're in this for the healthy lifespan extension, right? There are a few things that money can't buy, and healthy lifespan extension is currently one of them. And now we're hoping to remedy that.
Great. Well, obviously, Sebastian, you guys are doing some great work, backing some really interesting companies. And of course, we all look forward to reading the report. Thanks for joining us today.
Cheers. Thanks for having me.